Hi, it's April 25th, 2024, and I'm honored to have again with us Mark Changizi, who is, I give you the short introduction. He's brilliant, and he has a kind of good statistical scientific buffer and judging system. It could be he's a spiritual guru or something like that. I have no idea. But Mark, tell us your thoughts these days. What irritates? I mean, I could start with one lead, which is kind of what's gone wrong with our universities, professors, and all this kind of stuff. But you tell me where you want to go.
Well, I mean, I can't remember last time I was on exactly where we were in this mess. But today, in the last day or two, there's been lots of folks tweeting that that historically university students have traditionally been correct when they had these demonstrations. If you look back, I'm thinking to myself.
Let me just phrase it. They were on the right side of history.
Right. That's a lot of these different memes are coming through, and of course this is concerning the university protesters here and there around the United States, protesting against Israel, but really protesting and demonstrating and agitating for Hamas, outwardly for pro-Hamas, pro-Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, the counter argument to the notion that university protesters are sort of a bellwether of the righteous is the Cultural Revolution in China, which was, of course, a bottom-up mass hysteria. But university students were integral in that. Khmer Rouge, university students were pushing for the Khmer Rouge, which led to 2 million Cambodian deaths. The Islamic Revolution in Iran, which has oppressed my people for almost 50 years. So some of the greatest democides and genocides that occurred in the 20th century were radically supported by university students. The idea that university students have some kind of special privilege to see what's right is absurd. If anything, they're much more easily swept into social manias. They haven't developed the kinds of intuitions and aloofness that you can slowly get over time to realize people's ability to quickly get caught up in these things. They don't have intuitions for that at all.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing thing. I was talking with Theo Jordan, who's on Twitter, just yesterday, and was wondering how things got so crazy. And the fact of the matter is we didn't used to have like everybody going to university and kind of taking away from the workforce. We were kind of a more generative. We were progenitive. We had families and so forth, and people make fun of child labor, but basically people were doing the trade of the family in order to eat. And so if you, I know your background is in Persia, Iran, whatever. If you're, I don't know, rug making, you're a kid, you better learn how to do that. It takes time, and childhood is time for learning and everything like that. But this luxury of doing the abstract when the real is left wanting is not something that humanity had ability to do very much. And we tend to see this kind of go awry oftentimes. And you mentioned, the Taliban literally means the students, and I'm sure there are other aspects. But since we've used the I word, maybe can you tell us some of the kind of weird hypocrisies that people are supporting Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Yeah, you would imagine that this is an ad absurdum. You know that you've gone wrong when the folks that you now have to side with are Hamas, which is the oppressor. They weren't elected. It was not a free and fair elections. They shot their way and executed their sort of opponents once they were elected. And there's been not even the pretense of elections since then. They're one of the proxies of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the oppressor of Muslims and Persians generally and Jewish Iranians, which have fled for the last 50 years to the extent that they could. These are characteristic, easy evils to identify, and yet the narratives, the anti-Semitic narratives, which are with us and have been with us for a couple thousand years, are so strong that folks are actually siding with Hamas, Islamic Republic. Of course, some of these same folks are siding with Putin, are siding with the CCP, are now saying, well, we've over-exaggerated the extent to which Hitler was a bad guy, I don't know if you've seen these sorts of narratives are constantly coming up. These folks have inverted morality, and they really believe it. Their narratives justify what they're saying, and you're not going to convince them that they're wrong.
Are you familiar with my Twitter ex and real life friend Potkin Azarmer?
I don't think so.
So he's, I think he's possibly Azeri by heritage, but he grew up in Iran and emigrated around the time of the 79 revolution or thereafter to the UK. I think he'd been in school abroad at that time, and I don't think, I think he's gone back, but not very often, very much. And his he is in London. He shows up at some of the Hamas rallies, which are endless, it seems. And he has a placard, free Palestine from Hamas, free Gaza from Hamas. And I'm wondering, and he feels the same way about Iran, and he feels if the Islamic Republic of Iran is not so much. They would be just happy to get rid of the last I word, the Iran part, as long as they could be the Islamic Republic. I don't think they necessarily value or put much credence or faith into the Persians or Iranis themselves, and it's most, he mentions kind of as a Lebanese movement, Khomeini and whatnot, of this kind of Shia fundamentalism which took hold in Iran, and obviously we go further back, that Muslims took over the place. Is there tension kind of between the two parts of that word, Islamic Republic and Iran?
You mean, is there a tension or disagreement between those sides? Yeah, they're absolutely different. And the problem, of course, is that the progressive woke left and now the conspiracy woke right, their narratives just combine them together and pretend that Iranians equal the Islamic Republic. Most Iranians, and I don't have numbers on this, but certainly nearly all of the outspoken ones are like me and immediately saw the obvious parallels of you have Muslims and other ethnicities being oppressed by Islamic radicals. And it's those Islamic radicals which are trying to make war on the Jews and Israel, in particular, but really it's an anti-Jewish thing. The enemy of Israel and the enemy of Muslims and the enemy of Persians and Arabs is Hamas, is the Islamic Republic, and it's as simple as that. But what they want instead is to see nations against other nations, ethnicities against ethnicities, or something like this. And so they create this simple kind of just contrast or polarity, where it's just Israel versus Gaza, let's say, and that's not it at all. I don't know. I suppose that Iranians are, what's obvious to us because we've been oppressed by similar forces, oppressive forces all these years, is somehow not obvious to the progressive left or the woke right.
So Putkin feels as if there's kind of a Persian sensibility, and that the kind of the joys and beauties of the country are timeless, and there's kind of an ethnic aspect to it, that it's not Arab, it's not Islamic, and so forth. Is there, I know Tehran's a pretty modern place, and pre-mullahs, people walking around not much differently from, I don't know, you name the town, Athens or Tbilisi or wherever, but there's kind of the look. Because of the hijabs and all that kind of stuff. Is there kind of a possibility for a different thread of government, a different thread politically, such we might have seen during the little bit of the green sprouting, which I think Obama spurned. I think it was 2009 or so. I wonder if you have any sensibility of things, aka back home. I don't know if you consider it back home still. Oh, you were born here though, right?
I was born here, but no, I can't really speak to the extent to which there's enough of a groundswell, any leadership options besides the former king's son and so forth, that can possibly step in at this point. And if there is somebody that's sort of named that's floating around in the minds, I haven't heard it of someone that's really has that kind of gravitas to do that. I also don't know the numbers, whether it's 30% of the population that's still very pro-mullah, and it need only be 10% that's very strident and showing up, on the streets, enforcing it bottom up as they do, or whether it's 40 or I doubt that it's over 50%. Most Iranians don't want this government.
Do they have free and fair elections there?
I surely not, but I don't know the details. But they're all a sham. The candidates are sort of picked in advance. It's all kind of just a symphony.
Right. Yeah, it's all pre-conducted. You were talking about, you mentioned, Laura, kind of the left and the right. We think of the left and the right, but I think there's a certain wraparound aspect, like the political spectrum, but maybe it's more of a political circle. And you reposted this kind of left-right lunacy. I guess on my left here, you have the left, and here's on the right, kind of like the I suppose lowbrow aspect on both sides.
Now, in this case, I would say the left is is woke left, the right is woke right. The only counterexample here is the second row, where in fact the woke left and the woke right are both the guy on the left. They both are screaming that it's genocide, what Israel is doing. The conspiracy theory right is just as much screaming that. There's another faction of the right side there is actually another kind of viewpoint, which is sort of opposed, which are people who are pro-Israel, but they're just lumping Gazans together with, even the left and the far right are sometimes doing that. Gazans equals Hamas. They're all like one, and they're all good. like they're all gold and good, like the Gazans. But a lot of the enemy, a lot of some pro-Israeli radicals are like, no, all of the Gazans are they're basically Hamas terrorists, every last one of them. That kind of attitude, and so this is roughly speaking left and right, except for the second row. It's sort of getting at a different polarity.
Yeah, the trans one is always confusing. I'm not sure, it's a funny world out there.
But this is I've often said, look, there are, for every crazy left woke thing, because my audience is mostly on the right, so I often will argue against things that the right is believing is, because that's my audience. There's no sense in me arguing against the left. I'm just no one's arguing back. So a lot of the folks on the right are getting things completely wrong. They think there was some orchestrated thing, sometimes by the Jews. There's literally a narrative out there that the Jews are somehow behind the whole trans gay movement to disrupt, family and some kind of just storyline that they tell. But a lot of the folks, will say that really this is because we let the gays be free and let them have marriage, and this was all on purpose so that there could be the trans movement, as if this is all some kind of thing that was organized in the 1960s so that all of this could happen. And there are folks that's their standard belief. So we shouldn't have then let people just marry, or people can disagree about whether it should be legal marriage versus some other. Often as a libertarian, I was like, I'm not sure that we need marriage for anybody legally at all. It's like, should the government involved? Another whole conversation. But there's a lot of craziness on the right in this regard, and a lot of folks really do believe that the whole trans issues concerning kids, especially in women's sports and women's spaces, is because of the gays. Somehow they blame. And of course, I think a disproportionate number of folks in the gay community are annoyed as crap at the whole oversteps of the trans community.
Yeah, I do think there was, the so-called slippery slope. People, they don't hear about the domino theory, but I think there were dominoes in Southeast Asia. And I think that, there is a slippery slope, and I don't think this would have held. If you think that it has to be some kind of fertile soil for a plant to grow, I think the soil is kind of the confusion and the differing of minds about what is appropriate sexually and what are the mores. I think it's a harder play. I was reading. I'm actually writing I think I don't want to overdo this, but I think kind of a milestone article on methadone. People all think about the opioid epidemic, but they have recency bias. So there's three waves of the opioid epidemic. Say opioid epidemic 3 times fast. Actually hard. Anyway, there's wave one is OxyContin. Everyone knows about Painkiller, the series, and wave two is lowered heroin prices. People don't really talk about that. And wave three is fentanyl. So I think fentanyl is huge, real, and dangerous. And I think it's kind of a China play. They're shuttling it through Mexico. They're not regulating the stuff that goes in. They have their own port. They set up their own maquiladoras in Mexico. And I think it's part of the policy of disintegration of the U.S. And you can maybe analogize that to, the kind of different context they have on TikTok for our kids versus their kids. And that's transing and all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's a bigger influence. But so it's getting back to the fertile soil thing. What I've tried to do is contextualize that opioid epidemic, that you needed a bunch of people on opiates to get an opioid epidemic later. And William Burroughs, the guy who wrote Naked Lunch, and he was the heir to the Burroughs company fortune, typewriters and whatnot. But he was kind of a dissolute guy. He was a poet, part of the Beat Generation, Allen Ginsberg and all that. Anyway, he dallied with heroin. He also shot his wife point blank, supposedly in a William Tell accident. He was playing around trying to shoot an apple off her head. Who knows? Anyway, so he's got his issues. But here's a great quote I uncovered researching this story. And he said, addiction is a disease of exposure, that you need to have the stuff around in order to catch this disease. And I think that's a great, it's a great applicable term for other types of social contagion. I don't think, narcoholism or narcotic, addiction is a disease, although it's being framed that way. I think we institutionalize and medicalize a lot of things, such as gender dysphoria. And I don't want to rant too long on this, but I helped actually my Irani pediatric professor in University of Rochester, Mohsen Zia, back in the day. I think he's from Shiraz, with one of his sequential, next edition of his pediatrics textbook, which was one of the big tomes, one of the top 5 pediatric books. And I happened to get on eBay or whatever, I found a copy just to see if my writing had made it in there and whether I was attributed or whatnot. I couldn't find it anyway. But in that book, I'm like, 1970s, 80s medicine. Let's look up gender. Let's look up dysphoria. Let's look up gender dysphoria. Let's go look up transing. Let's look up. None of it's there.
Yeah,
it's not there at all. And getting back to William Burroughs' quote, addiction is disease of exposure. He was writing about Naked Lunch at 50, so in 2009 or so, while he was obviously still alive. He said Iran has X number, like 3 million heroin addicts. Out of a much smaller population than we had. We have almost the same number. They have like basically 4 or 5 times worse heroin problem than we do, because that's where the poppies are. They get it right from Afghanistan, fresh. And Russia didn't have an opiate problem until they kind of touched Afghanistan. Speaking of the same thing, 79 and whatnot. And you don't get this disease until you've been exposed to it. And I think that kind of the whittling away at social mores and social fabric, religion, all that kind of stuff is the pre-drug, is the methadone, essentially, the kind of the watering the garden, whatever your analogy might be. So that's my rant today.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. I mean, the tectonics of socio-political environments and the social manias that occur have some kind of ontogeny that you can look back and say, were it not for this, and then that became fertile grounds potentially for this other kind of cultural, springing up that did occur. It doesn't mean that one caused the other per se, or that it was much less that there was a plan to do X so that you could do Y. But you can always look back and look at the historical trends. Like, for example, a lot of folks back when all the conversations about whether homosexuality should be, legalized, or whether it's, just trying to have a fully acceptance for it. Like, well, if you do this, suddenly you're going to have polygamy and everybody's going to be marrying in, multiple couples and, 3 people that are all married together. Well, that never happened, right? So you could have thought that it created a fertile ground for that, but it happened not to. Maybe in a different universe ran forward, different kinds of bubblings up would have happened, and that could have become a movement, but it didn't. So it's one thing to look at the sequence of events that happened to cause one another. It's another thing to say that there was a conspiracy, a plan, and gays were part of it, and they did this to us with this trans movement that has gone over certain ethical lines.
Well, we could debate. It's hard to debate these kind of things because there's social aspects. It's hard to get data. But if you look at the university now, I'm going to have to put an asterisk after my Yale degree. First of all, I got a BS, which, I mean, I suppose there's another, BS stands for something else, but mine was Bachelor of Science, chemistry and physics. And, and it was not super, super woke. I mean, there are some elements that I see of the kind of the campus ethos today. But, things are different. The professorship is different. The student body is different. I think Yale, back when I was there, was about 80% male. And now it's less than 50% male. And those males are probably less than 50% male themselves. And when you see kind of, I mean, you don't want to use any of these words, but you see, kind of masculinized women and feminized men as the voices and so forth on campus. And I think, I mean, I heard that like 40% of the guys are gay, or something like that. I don't know if that's true, but on campus, it's a different world, and there's going to be a different message. And, it's not necessarily the physical act of homosexuality per se, but there is kind of a way of making these new identities, and that always are going to be in opposition to the man. And I use that term, I guess, with double entendre. It's the man and the manhood that people are kind of rebelling against.
Yeah, I mean, the same kind of revolutionary spirit was certainly always there when I was in academia. We didn't have quite the explosion of this kind, although there was the 99% or the top 1%, in the 2008 or something like this. I can't remember what it was called. The 1% demonstrations at universities were everywhere, arguing against the 1%.
Occupy.
Say again?
Occupy Wall Street, 2014.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street, arguing against the 1%ers. I can't remember what year that was, but of course, you'll find these kinds of things that have occurred. Often it was pro-socialism, pro-communism. So there's certainly no shortage of history within universities of demonstrators finding that the folks that they look up to are revolutionaries fighting for the oppressed, who were in fact dictatorships who oppressed the very people they were fighting for. So their leader, everybody's wearing a Che Guevara shirt or Fidel kind of poster in their dorm room. This stuff goes back 40 or 50 years. So there's a genuine kind of meme that happens at those ages, and of course it's across the entire population, at all ages, but seems disproportionately there to want to embrace the opposite of the freedom of the culture that they're in, somehow inverting that and thinking that's the evil. And then they, in fact, then bite on to the most evil folks in the world as the folks that they look up to.
Yeah, and this one
that they govern, in fact, are hating exactly those people. So I see this as a very similar sort of thing. It's just not announced Islamofascism rather than communism.
So who's going to win? It seems like our society seems to have some kind of disintegration aspect, and Europe is, I think, a little more advanced than we are. I mean, Europe's an aggregation of terms and countries, but parts of Europe are not kind of regenerating themselves. I think the birth rate amongst Italians is 0.8, and if you've ever seen 80% of a child, it's not a pretty sight. But it doesn't seem to be any kind of like counterfactual view of where you replace these terms. I mean, people say things now about whites, for instance, and if you just replace the word black in it, you'd be like horribly racist. But if you say it the other way around, you're anti-racist, which doesn't seem to make logical sense. And nobody talks about any of these rights or things that people are demonstrating for. The fact you can't have a demonstration like that in Hamasistan, Gaza, or you can't have those kind of demonstrations, and all your other views, that all these other things you think you like, non-binary, whatever, you can't be non-binary because there's no such thing as even binary in most of the countries that are supporting the countries they support in this case. I mean, illogic, I suppose, is the order of the day. How do you make sense of any of this?
I mean, communism was arguably not any more logical than that. I mean, it was absurd on its face that humans could possibly be willing to all work for the good of others, and whatever that standard saying. There was no way anybody in the right mind would ever imagine that this was possible. nor anybody in their right mind looking at any of the actual histories of communist nations would imagine that this is in fact in any way whatever was occurring, right? The closest places that this might occur is in an actual kibbutz with a few hundred people or a few thousand people in Israel, right? Where you actually sort of have a lowercase c communism at a very small consensual scale, right? So everything about it and the whole idea that it's a zero sum. These are the arguments when I was a youngster, always with the socialists and the communists thinking the world is zero sum. No, nothing about the world is zero sum. And like they're trying to summarize the wealth of a nation on the basis of how much ore is in the ground and scarce resources they have in the ground. And so therefore the United States has fewer scarce resources in our ground than, let's say, Africa. We're richer than Africa. It means we must have stole their stuff, because their model of how wealth is created is this childish notion. Their entire movements were filled with buckets of ridiculous notions and sometimes self-contradictory notions, just as much so as the sort of Islamo-fascist, anti-Semitic ones who believe that they're in fact fighting for the oppressed, yet they support all of the greatest fascist, Islamo-fascist dictators of our time. So we moved to, we're past communism. I have optimism that at the end of the day, even though every other tweet right now is from some person saying that absurdly saying that there's genocide in Palestine, every other tweet. I mean, in reality, in the real world, it's not like this, right? You look around the real world, it's not like this. Twitter is not real life. Twitter is exaggerating the viewpoints of a small crazy minority and making it appear as if it's 50% of the population. It's still important for us when I see it, because that means that there's strong memes going around, which is why I want to strongly identify as someone with a real face saying, no, you're crazy and here's why, so that I try to sort of put up one of the many bulwarks of millions of folks like you and me. But I don't want to let myself believe and be depressed and thinking that the world is really gone that way. But there are some serious issues that we have to overcome, just like overcoming communism was a generations long struggle.
Yeah, I have to avoid doing X right before I go to sleep. There's various vortices of negative, horrible anger. I have my I don't have a teddy bear. I've got a dog, and he kind of, he's small enough to kind of hang around the bed and whatnot. And when I was a kid, I didn't have a dog, but I had this little tiger that I held on to and try to think pleasant thoughts before I go to sleep, and that seemed to work and whatnot. But there is kind of this illusion of that some of these metaphorical battlefields, verbal, are the world, and they're not. Thank God. And there are beautiful days still to be had. Flowers still sprout. My dog has no concept of cash, greed, or political events, and so there's always kind of a nice kind of, I guess, wrestling mat padding upon which you can lay. But on the other hand, it is pretty depressing to see some of the stuff that gets spouted from quote unquote leaders, which are pretty much similarly juvenile as what you might see amongst the worst spoutings on X. I was just wondering if we had to order and categorize. I mean, we've forgotten about good old COVID and good old climate and good old what we've been talking about, good old transitioning and whatnot. What do you see as kind of the you mentioned tectonic plates? What do you see as the tectonic plates of our culture, and which way are they going? Are they moving? I don't want to ruin my metaphor. Are they moving forward or backwards in something like? Have we reached peak stupidity? I guess is one way of putting it.
You never reach peak stupidity, as we've seen. Look, here's one positive note that I've seen. Although much of the world on the censorship front, right? Certainly things are getting bad. Most of the world still doesn't understand the importance of free expression. They still have a very strong intuition, and a very natural intuition, that it's the role of government and experts to make sure that the truth is spread to the population. Because why would you want misinformation sent to the population? That's highly intuitive, right? That's just like a planning government, a socialist planning. Why, we should organize the economy to make sure that all the goods are being produced so that no one starves, so we can distribute all the stuff to the people. That's what a nice paternalistic government does. But that's not how that's not how economies can possibly work. You'll just end up with bread lines and cheese. Free markets is both the consistent with freedom way, but even more importantly for this point is that it's the utilitarian optimal way to in fact produce those very goods. And the same thing for the free market of ideas. And free expression requires misinformation coursing through it as the rungs of the ladder of truth, because you build on those and slowly, of course, you're going to end up with wrong narratives over time. And I've talked a lot about how these narratives can form, and that like blockchains, they can be very hard to ever go away. But there is no alternative. Those are some of the illnesses that come with free expression. But anything else in terms of trying to control it is going to be much worse. So things are getting very bad in terms of censorship. But look, Elon Musk. There are some folks that are detractors of him, even on the pro free expression side. But look, he hasn't had to do what he didn't need to do what he has been doing with X. Some people say, oh, it's all just a plan so that he can take over the world and have, the app that does everything, and he doesn't really care about free expression. No, he wouldn't. He has no need to talk the way he does and take on all of these cases, these free expression pro bono, go after the Brazilian, judge and all of the things that he's doing, he need not do. These are things because he wants to actually be good. I mean, what he thinks is everybody wants to be good. He's motivated by a desire to stop censorship and push for free expression. And in this case, I mean, we agree with him. It's going to be difficult for him because he can't just shut down X in every country that's demanding censorship. He has to follow their legal laws, otherwise, or extent push up roadblocks and use lawyers to do what he can. But he can't just enforce free expression in every country. He has to follow those laws or attempt to. So I feel like these sorts of dramatic incidents that have been occurring have spurred conversations throughout societies, like in Brazil and in the world, where they're suddenly having to talk about it. There's for the first time, like, no, here's why Musk is right, and here's why free expression is important. And I think these are conversations this generation and the previous one basically never had. So I think this is hopefully important, and maybe it could be the beginning of a change. Were it not for Elon Musk, I think that we would just be deeper than we were, 2 years ago before we bought it.
I think there would still be avenues, but it would be more along the lines of samizdat under the Soviets. I mean, people had pamphlets and they had to, be able to, burn them and whatnot, and they passed it around. I mean, people, I think, still had a sensibility that was very anti-Soviet. We saw it as soon as the wall came down. I actually was in East Europe before the wall came down in 1987. We traveled to Hungary, Czechoslovakia, as it was known, Yugoslavia, and East Germany a little bit. And people in private, if they could really be in private, they would talk, but even then very carefully. But the whole people have seen movies where there's kind of this dystopia, and considering it's the workers' paradise, I got to tell you, walking through those places at that time, I suppose you could probably duplicate it in North Korea now if you were to go, but it was just the most amazing thing. After a while, you get used to it. The people don't look at you on the street; they're all looking down. On the subway in East Berlin, they're all looking at some place on the floor. Everybody. And they're wearing very similar clothing. And it's just out of one of these movies. You just can't really believe it's true and happening. And I got to tell you, there's that movie, I think Smallville, everything turns into color when he has an orgasm or something like that. It was a little bit like that to go from East to West Berlin at the time. Just I know it was both in color, but East Germany was pretty much black and white or light blue and white for what the workers wore and everything like that. And went to, West Berlin. It was just people kind of chatting on the streets. We'd been behind the Iron Curtain for like almost a month, and on bicycles and whatnot. We saw different parts of that world that many other people might have at the time. But when we came in, it was just like, oh my God! It was kind of like you've been holding your breath underwater, and you finally come out and you take a breath, and everything was like that. And we had much better time of it than the people living there. And we had the ability to bicycle through or train through and have the money to disappear. And if something happened, I guess whisked out. So we weren't under real threat. But that kind of like control and interaction where you don't get to talk to people and whatnot. I don't think people have any sense and sensibility of what that's like. They were able to hang out on Columbia University quad and do these funky dances as if, they could do that, somehow, in Tahrir Square or in Tehran or Gaza downtown when it existed. I don't think that's the case. And they have no idea what it's like to be under genuine closure. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is when women are on the airplane, as soon as they go over the border from Iran, they all take their headscarves off and relief, as if just they can breathe again.
Yeah.
And the closest thing that we might experience, I don't know if you remember what it was like to be on an airplane with masks. And airplanes with masks airplanes are never a fun place per se, but I remember I was the first time when there was suddenly no masks on the plane, and suddenly it felt colorful. And you could hear, and I did a little short science moment video, just basically letting you, the audience, listen to the people just talking. Because when you have a mask, it's not just merely that everybody is also checking to see that their mask is good so they don't get yelled at by somebody else. You're all watching each other or worried that others are watching you, concerning whether you're being a good COVID person, right? And so that kind of righteous cult, bottom-up enforcement is constantly around you, which is why all these people in Eastern Europe, are looking down, not wanting to look up. They're all
they don't want to get involved. They don't want to get. I mean, we see it now. I was actually pointing to my water can here. I had my magic. You have one there. I had my magic water bottle on the airlines. I would get a drink of something, and I would take a sip every 10 minutes. And every time, I would always have it in my hand so that I have it without the mask. And every time somebody's walking by, I'd be like taking a sip so that I could theoretically still be having a need not to have the mask on. But I think, we get that now because you can't say certain things. I mean, this whole N-word stuff is the first step in that. It's kind of a lunacy. And I think that's, you listen to every other, we have Spotify or whatever, you can listen to a zillion different songs and they get kind of thrown into my mix here and there randomly if I'm on kind of open mode. And I pretty much every black song, I mean, there's like a 30-40% chance that word's going to be used. And so you can't say it, but all the kids are going to know the words of the song. I mean, this crazy absurdity of the thing. And right now on my Facebook, we're having an argument over this biker, a bicyclist, Molly Cameron. It's not Molly. It's his name is Frank, Floyd, or George. And he wears, basically he's a guy and he has not stopped his male testosterone, which is redundant, but that's what they're calling his male-based testosterone. He has not stopped having male levels of it, which means he's a guy. He's got a beard and he looks very manly. But the only thing he's really done is made a midriff of his tight little bicycle thing. And he's, got apparatus and whatnot. And I get so he's being defended by a bicyclist friend of mine who's, knowledgeable, techie and whatnot. But he's defending because he says, look, he's not been racing in women's races. He's racing in men's races and he does well. He wins some of those, So he's fully a guy. And why would he drop his testosterone? He wouldn't be able to win those races. I suppose when he stops winning those races, maybe he'll move over. But, on the other hand, he insists on me calling Molly. And it's a she. And my friend keeps calling him she. It's like, what about this situation is a she, aside from that he cut his midriff off? I mean, I've done that on hot days, taken my shirt, not quite that same way. But, what about this? It's kind of like this weird caricature of what is a woman, to think that if you have a ponytail or you put lipstick on, that you're a woman. I don't know. But the debates get all these kind of surreal levels of people arguing about nothing.
Yeah, as something that I talked about recently was the degree to which the trans community is you really can only understand it as irreversible body modification kind of transformations that people undergo. So as far back as you can go in tribes, you find irreversible body modifications done to show that you're a member of your group or particular tribe or whatever it might be. And these are, burnings and, scarifications and massive kinds of, ear stretching, lip stretching, and tattoos, whether it's gangs, and just all over human societies are these irreversible, and the key is that they're irreversible modifications that show membership. That's the most severe way that you can show membership of a righteous community, and it's always some kind of righteous community. It's either it's your community or some new thing that you've joined or whatever it might be. They're irreversible. It shows that you really are truly a member. And as I often talk about, membership signals start off as membership signals. That is, virtue signals start off as membership signals. They're just membership signals, and they have to be weird, things that a normal person wouldn't do. And these are irreversible ones, so they're very severe ones. But they culturally evolve over time to be justified as not just something that we're doing to show membership. It evolves justifications for why they're actually good. It's actually good to do this because it's actually kind of good for you. It's better for you. And people that don't do that, it's not even good. And whatever it might be, there's some kind of justifications for why that is. And if you don't view the trans, not just cross-dressing or, actual trans with surgeries and permanent body modifications in this way, I don't think you can understand it. These are, they're of course disproportionately or entirely folks that are on the far left. And so to really show that you're a true believer in these woke ideas and the whole suites of kind of woke ideas that comes with it, you can engage in this kind of permanent change, which is a signal that you are a member of this woke club. And so there's nothing new about that kind of thing. People have done that all the time. It just now happens to be irreversible transformations of sex, of course, which you can't possibly, in fact, do. And it becomes, in fact, virtuous. It's actually good to do this. It's actually healthy to do this. And whole justifications bubble up over time, not because anybody's lying, but because it gets selected for. The people that come up with sort of a good explanation, they're all sort of post hoc justifications, right? But the ones that sound like better justifications to the human minds will tend to spread across, and they'll be selected for. And other justifications, it'll slowly build up, so suddenly masks are actually work. The science works. It went from not working, it became a membership signal. That is in March and April of 2020, no one wore them, but suddenly a few people who are really COVID cultish would wear them, because it sort of said, I really care. But then 2 or 3 months later, suddenly there's 100 articles that say, in fact, really, truly, they are virtuous, not just a membership signal.
You just gave me a business idea. I think I might make a keffiyeh mask.
Yeah.
Keffiyeh COVID mask. I posted this today. This actually emanated from my research on my methadone article. And it's the term of art was medicalization. That I was looking at. It became harm reduction. And in the 60s, it was medicalization. You take a problem, you medicalize it. So the doctors are taking care of your problem. So we see this now with medicalization of obesity, alcoholism, gambling, and now gender dysphoria, and all the things that might have been problems for you become diseases, and they need to be treated and whatnot. And so looking along that line, I was found an article, and one thing led to another. And I came across this, and it's like, old times. This is, I think, from back 2000 or so. This article here, if I click through to it, what year is this? We can't see it right off the bat. Oh, here it is. Let's see. I can't see the year. Anyway, it was a while ago, about 20 years ago, the medicalization of female circumcision. That's where I was Googling the word, this showed up. Harm reduction or promotion of a dangerous practice. So this is medicine for you, or social medicine and whatnot. So you can't just say it's a bad thing because you're writing in a journal. You have to give it both sides. So harm reduction. So female circumcision. So what you can do for harm reduction is the places that do this. Excuse me a second. So where was I? The places that do this are right here. I don't know if you can tell from the colors here. This is I forget exactly when this graph is done, but female circumcision has a certain belt, no pun intended, that coincides with Islam, right? So I wrote here the medicalization of female circumcision, harm reduction or for simpler times before our own forms of surgical mayhem clouded our ability to judge. You don't hear anything about female circumcision. I haven't done like a Google Trends on this, but I'm just imagining that you're not going to see or hear much about female circumcision because we are in no position any longer to talk about it. That it's a bad thing.
Yeah. And I don't remember, but I thought that the folks that were mostly talking about the horrors of female circumcision back in the day in the 90s, and that was a 2001 article, were on the left.
Yeah.
And I certainly kind of
And
agree.
they just stopped. They stopped. They're for women's rights, and for Iran, no, they don't care about women's rights. Afghanistan, whatever. And so same thing in Hamas. I mean, I did notice that during what I call the Hamassacre, October 7th, they had all guys doing the pillaging, raping, and whatnot. I was kind of upset. I mean, I don't want to joke, macabrely, but how upsetting that they didn't involve an equal force of women to go over and do the same stuff from Gaza. I don't know what's the deal there.
Right. I was going to mention in terms of membership signals becoming virtue signals, and so you have this for irreversible sex change operations. You have this for masks, became a membership signal, and then evolved to be a virtue signal. In the case of 10/7, very quickly, in fact, even on the same day, the accusations were that, well, Israel is genocidal. And so over the next couple of months, Israel's genocidal became a membership signal. It was absurd on its face, right? There's no way in any sense that they could be, but that's why it works as a membership signal. Only someone who's truly, fully a member of the pro-Hamas, anti-Israel kind of would ever say such a thing. That's why it worked. And I even did a video. I did a video in like November, and I said, look, here's this membership signal that they're pushing out. They're saying this completely absurd phrase that they're saying, and it's going to slowly evolve into, in fact, a virtue signal. They're going to actually develop justifications over time so that it actually is true to them. From their social narrative point of view, they really will genuinely 100% believe this utter absurdity, right? So at this point, even if in the most extreme number of fatalities in Gaza, 32,000, and of course it was, and then recently they pulled back, and Hamas for some reason said out of the blue was 22,000. We shouldn't believe any of these two numbers at all. It's probably lower than all. But even if you took, let's say, 22,000 just for their more recent estimate, and then Israel is suggesting that there's around 12,000 militants actually killed amongst those 22,000. So we have about 10,000 civilian casualties and about 12,000 militants. Let's just say roughly 10,000. This is a roughly 1-to-1 ratio for an urban war.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
With Hamas
never been done.
And underneath and inside the houses of the civilians. This is one of the lowest civilian to militant casualty ratios you could ever find historically, right? This is the opposite of genocidal. It is exactly the prime example of a military going out of its way, dropping leaflets before they bomb and so forth. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're going to have to round this out. I'm going to just pop in, people want to help support my video cast here. They can go buy my book. It's even better if they read it. It's still out there. I'm working on these other books right now. I'm working on a book on kind of a different way to conceive, think about cancer. It's not a cure. And I've got a book on the kind of addiction mess, narcotics and whatnot, getting out of the addiction maze. And I've got this chapter I'm working on methadone. Hope to have it on brownstone. And people can find you at your name, basically, and on Twitter. And then from thereupon, they can find your books and so forth in your webpage and carry on. I mean, it's great stuff out there. And you are all that and more. So we very much appreciate you being on. Any final words?
Randy.
So thank you so much. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.